All right, welcome to our Hail the Commanders press conference of the day. I know. Those for us Ravens fans are still trying to find some sort of hope and joy in others' victories. We're unifying. We're all Bills fans this year. Go Bills. This is going to be a tough weekend for the AFC to watch, but hopefully Josh Allen can pull it out. With that, what a week. This has been the start of what we are going to see is a very intense new transition. We are understanding the new reality as it relates to the new presidential administration. We've seen a lot of uncertainty as we expected, and we're still trying to assess where things are actually headed. A number of executive orders that we're still trying to digest and understand the impact of, both on their practical impact and also their fiscal impact moving forward. I'm very pleased today to be joined with two of our wonderful chairs that are already off to a great start and moving very quickly through a number of the important issues. And I'll hand it over to them very shortly. I just wanted to note two quick things. Obviously, we've been able to digest the budget over the last week and get a better sense of where things are and the balanced approach that I think that the governor has started the conversation with. We have a long way to go, and we have to see how the details play out. I'm sure there's going to be a number of questions about the blueprint bill that was put in. I would say we are still digesting some of those changes as well. I appreciate the governor's trying to look at how to bend the cost curve in a number of different areas. In some places, that makes a lot of sense when it comes to collaborative teaching time. In other areas, when we look at places like concentration of poverty, that's going to be a much, much harder conversation and probably subject to some negotiation as the session moves forward. The other highlight I wanted to point out is around the hearing for the DDA, or Developmental Disabilities Administration. I think Chairman Gazzone did an excellent job, and the committee members really trying to push the question. I think we're still trying to figure out exactly what happened. It's complicated. We know that there's a lot of moving pieces to it, but I think we still aren't quite certain about how we got to the level of mismatch between revenues and expenses in DDA, and so we're going to have to keep diving into that. With that, I'm going to stop there and hand it over to our wonderful chair of the Senate Finance.
A little bit shorter. Thank you all very much. I just want to brag a little bit about the Finance Committee. I only have 10 right now. We're still waiting for one appointment, but we've worked really hard the last 2 weeks. We've had 9 briefings. I don't know how much you're following our briefings, but the Prescription Drug Affordability Board spoke with us. We have the long-term solvency issue of the Uninsured Employers Fund, the AHEAD model, which was a very long hearing, as we try to get our hospitals working with the HSCRC to get what the hospitals need and make sure they're funded the way they need to be. And then an issue that's dear to my heart is the emergency department wait times. So we had a pretty intense hearing about what we can do and what's going to be done in the future to try to improve our wait times. Of course, we've had our fiscal briefing. I'm happy I'm not the chair of Budget and Tax, I'll just say that. And then we've had the Maryland Department of Labor discussing misclassification of employees, and that's been a big issue. The Maryland Health Care Commission spoke yesterday on the reproductive rights issue and how we are going to use the codes to protect women who are having reproductive care in our state. And then we finally ended with the Maryland Auto Insurance Fund briefing, which is going to have an assessment this year to insurers. So nothing controversial. It's been an easy 2 weeks. On top of that, we've heard 20 bills. And I want to thank the president for our Wednesday morning pro formas, because that's really given us the opportunity to squeeze in these extra briefings. We passed our first 5 bills yesterday. Of course, the chair of JPR got ahead of us and got the first bill passed on the floor. Amazing. But, I think that my committee is working really well together. I'm really pleased with the diversity of background in the committee, and look forward to continuing our work. We have a lot of work to do this year, this session, but I'm sure that we will work well and turn out good legislation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. So the Judicial Proceedings Committee, we've had 2 briefings so far. We've had one on the Department of Juvenile Services, the OPEGA report that came out that offered us a glimpse into some of the challenges and the path forward for that department. We also had a briefing on housing. We've passed over 20 rental protection bills or tenant protection bills over the last couple of years, and wanted to analyze the impact on the housing market and the connectivity between the two. We also have been joined by 2 new members of the Senate, Sarah Love and Shanika Henson, both of whom have done a remarkable job, brilliant attorneys in their own right, have lent themselves to the discussion, have really offered a lot of valuable insight, and have really stepped up and really valuable members of the committee, and really excited to have them on board. Back onto the juvenile justice. We've exercised our oversight role with those briefings, asked a lot of intense questions. It was a 4-hour-long briefing. Juvenile justice remains a top of mind for all of us. There will be a couple of pieces of legislation offered both in the House and the Senate that we will have to grapple with. We have to strike a balance between correcting some of the past injustices and making sure that we have a more equitable justice system with balancing that with public safety and the Department of Juvenile Services' ability to actually cope with the new realities of any new work that they may get under any new bill. So we're still going to analyze that as the session goes forward. We also have a couple of bills on parole reform that are coming down the pipeline, geriatric parole and medical parole. These are perennial issues, but I think there's a renewed sense this year that we can put some energy into those, and I think we'll make some significant progress this year. Again, I talked about housing. We have something called Good Cause, which has garnered a lot of attention. We are going to balance those equities between the housing market and the creation of new affordable housing. We learned that not only do we have a housing shortage, but more Marylanders, that missing middle, the working class, are leaving Maryland because of housing affordability issues. And so if our economy is going to grow, we have to really address this in a balanced manner as well. We also have tort reform. Those are perennial issues. So the non-economic damages cap will be front and center, and then obviously we'll continue to look at the fiscal impact and what we can do with the Child Victims Act, the victims of child sex abuse. Obviously, you saw that fiscal briefing last week. There will be a piece of legislation that we'll be entertaining in the next couple of weeks that could change what that window looks like, and that may be coming from the governor, may be coming from a member. So. With that, happy to take questions and give it back to the Senate President, but happy to be here. I will also mention that those pro forma sessions on Wednesday are actually amazing, or it allows us to get to work. We start at 10 o'clock on those days to allow our committee to be a lot more efficient. So with that, Mr. President.
Just one quick note, as I was sort of sitting and thinking, hearing all of or two of our four standing committee chairs. Each one of the issues that one of the chairs mentioned could be in its own right, its own major topic, and yet we're trying to deal with 20 of them at the same time. So I think it's a testament to how challenging and complex session has become, because these issues are just so meaty and hard, and time is our enemy to really get through all of it in the time that's available. Last point I also forgot to mention is that we look forward later today at 12:30 swearing in our 46th of 47 member. Currently, Delegate Dalia Attar will be sworn in as a member of the Senate today at 12:30. We are excited for her to join our ranks and join the Senate family, and we look forward to swearing in our 47th senator as soon as possible so we can be at full strength. So with that, let me open up.
Could you or the chairman speak a little bit about the non-economic damages cap that you're talking about lifting? Can you say what you think's broken about that? Does that need immediate attention? Just a sense of where what you're thinking.
Sure. We passed that bill last year out of the Senate, and we raised that cap significantly. And the conversation shifted to the House. It's going to originate in the House this year, and we'll reevaluate where we are. This doesn't affect medical malpractice, but it does have a cascading impact on all of those industries. So when we're in the fiscal situation that we're in right now, I think we have to be very tempered in our approach, lifting any sort of cap. Fiscally, this is a private sector thing, but it still has an impact on government. So we have to be very careful what we do.
In terms of tax revenue?
No, just the impact on business and liability and insurance premiums going up.
Okay, so wait a minute. I'm sorry, I'm new here.
Sure, yeah.
You raised the cap last year.
We did not. We passed the bill. It passed out of the Senate, went to the House. It did not move out of the House.
Okay, so now you're revisiting it for purposes of economic growth?
No, so it'll originate out of the House this year. So we don't have a bill yet. I know the Vice Chairman probably put one in yesterday, so we have not had a hearing on it yet, but the House will take action first this year if they take action at all.
Okay, but you think the playing field has changed a little bit in terms of the...
I think the economic conditions of our economy here in Maryland have changed, and obviously certainly with our government, with the $3 billion structural shortfall that we're working through right now. I think the tone and tenor of the conversation is a little bit different this year than it was last year.
You see more willingness in the House, is what you say.
Probably less willingness overall because of the exposure to liability and insurance premiums going up if we raise the cap significantly.
Mr. Chair, you mentioned just a moment ago something very interesting. New legislation regarding juvenile justice laws and the child sex abuse issue that's going on. Could you elaborate, please, on both of those?
Sure. More pointedly, we've had a number of discussions of, here's something called direct file or youth charges adults. And that is something that, if you were to kind of take the current process as it works now, when the youth goes into the adult system, it can take months to resolve that case. In the interim, that youth is not getting services and supports they need not to recidivate. If you shift them down to the juvenile system, they'll get a quicker disposition of the case. It'll lighten the load through the courts, and you'll get those supports immediately. So you'll get better public safety outcomes. So I think there's no question as to whether we should do this eventually. The question remains in the Department of Juvenile Services' ability to digest that responsibility. And so that's why that oversight hearing that we had was so important, because it gives you some ground truth in some of the weaknesses in the department. To the Secretary's credit, he did understand and took responsibility for those shortcomings, a number of which were legacy shortcomings from the prior administration, and laid out a path forward. Whether that is going to be fast enough for us to move on a significant piece of legislation this year remains to be unseen, but I think we have a responsibility to balance public safety with obviously addressing the status quo, which is unacceptable. And that's where the debate lies.
Mr. President, what questions remain for you regarding the DDA following that hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the reimbursement and the payback of reimbursements and forward funding. There's a mismatch in timing of how we got to a place in switching over the systems of how our forward funding became so much greater than what the invoices ended up being. It looks like there's been about an 18% increase in the billing year over year for services provided. I think it's really important to note that these are some of the most important and most vulnerable Marylanders in the state, and we have to make sure that we take care of them well and provide the services that are necessary for individuals that are eligible and for their families. But we have to understand that how in a new system, the billing increased by 18% without a clear understanding through the year how we got there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, following up on that, we heard from testimony given yesterday that a lot of the advocates are extremely concerned and they feel like they're not feeling received by the Department of Health when they kind of interact with and voice their concerns on these budget cuts. Particularly, they're worried about the staff wanting to leave due to lower wages that are being proposed in these cuts. What is your messaging, and do they have right to be concerned on that front?
Look, I think that in this year where we're really trying to rein in costs everywhere and live within our means and within taxpayers' means, there's a lot of consternation out there. I have a great deal of sympathy for those advocates and those who are Marylanders who are engaging with the Department of Disabilities. Again, these are some of the most vulnerable Marylanders in our state. I think we have to get a little bit more transparency about the costs themselves so that we can make sure that these are the right and appropriate cost containment measures. We're still a bit uncertain from the department why those increased rates happened. And so if it's about better service provision versus a new format of billing, I think we have to get to the bottom of it before we can make a full assessment. We just need more from the Department of Health right now.
Mr. President, my understanding was part of the problem was coughed up to a lack of proper accounting. Did that get to you? And I mean, what was your interpretation of that? Is that not exactly where the problem lies? Is that too broad? And where exactly does this responsibility lie?
Yeah, I think lack of accounting is a challenging statement because we still are unsure. I think in the switchover of the billing system, we don't know if it was about accounting or actual services provided and how they were billed and invoiced. That's two different problems that I think we got a better understanding of the changeover of systems, but I don't think we got to the bottom of exactly where the mismatch occurred. And so we still have to dive in before we can make our final decisions about the budget
Should
this
there be
year.
another hearing?
We're going to continue to have multiple conversations with DDA. They'll be in front of the subcommittee that Senator Cory McRae oversees, and we will make sure that we are continuously diving into the agency to provide oversight.
Mr. President, On the governor's blueprint plans, you're saying yourself, you're starting to see some of the effects of those cuts and what they would mean for different jurisdictions. In Baltimore, we're learning that there could be nearly $400 million short on, in various programs. And we're wondering, are you concerned that the loss of funding could stall progress in Baltimore and elsewhere? And will you be looking for ways to avoid these cuts?
I mean, certainly, look, nobody wants to cut. Also, no one wants to raise taxes. So it's a double-edged sword here that we're trying to balance. When it comes to the blueprint in particular, you know, there are areas where I think it does make sense to trim the cost curve. And if you look, even with all of the proposals writ large that are in the governor's, if we adopted all of them, it would still be a 6% increase year over year for public education spending. So I think that's an important note, that it is not a cut in that there will be reductions in force or cuts overall. It is a cut in the increase. And so that's an important kind of standard out there. Now, districts were expecting more, and their expectation might be less than where they landed. But it's not that we are cutting education, so we are leveling off the increase. On concentration of poverty in particular, I will say, you know, I just this interim visited a school in my district, Curtis Bay Elementary, which has had stable leadership for a while. When I was first elected, it was in a really, really challenging place. I mean, it was a tough, tough school. And I hadn't been there for a while until we were celebrating a new playground that was able to be constructed with some state money and Kaboom. And when we went in, the principal in each classroom, not totally unmanufactured, genuine, honest response, we'd walk into a classroom, the kids would get up, run, and try and hug the principal. And just the smiles on their faces were unbelievable. I say this because afterwards I asked him, you know, I'm blown away by what's happening in this building. The last time I was here, it was so challenging. His response was, you know, I've never had the level of resources that I've been able to have before. I'm able to have a music teacher after school. I'm able to have an arts program. I have a social worker that comes in and can deal with the trauma that a lot of kids have faced here in the Curtis Bay neighborhood. And it was just very obvious. He said for the first time in his teaching career, in his educational career, he went into a district office meeting and they said, what else can we do? And he had to pause because he just had never been in a position where he was not sure what the next thing could go to, because so much resources have been poured into the school of high need. So I think we are doing the right thing, and we need to keep that progress up. We also have to do it within our means. And so that's the balance that we'll have to make this year.
Have you spoken with the governor about those thoughts?
We have. He knows some of the consternation around it, particularly the concentration of poverty issues. But look, I think this is going to be a hard conversation for the whole membership, the whole General Assembly with the governor. We have to make tough choices to make sure that we are providing exceptional services in a way that is sustainable financially in the long run.
Mr. President, you mentioned the executive orders in Washington this week. Do you have any sense of how this is going to be impacting federal workers in Maryland, especially when you think in light of the DEI announcements? How is that all going to work out?
Yeah, we have not seen any specific numbers about how many Marylanders are affected specifically by some of the initial orders. You know, here's what I would say. If you look at JP Morgan and the JP Morgan's approach, Jamie Dimon just recently came out and said on the DEI issues, on diversity, equity, and inclusion, JP Morgan's not backing down on this. What they've realized is it is in their shareholders' interest and it is in their company's interest to have a diverse workforce. We know that in the General Assembly, we know that in the public sector, that if we empower voices across the spectrum and we find avenues of opportunity for all people, we all benefit. And so, you know, I'm pretty saddened to see the sort of assault on this. I think that it is an inappropriate approach and actually is something that will lead to a negative outcome for Americans in the long run. We are a diverse society. It is what makes America great. And so by backing down on this recognition that we need to be intentional in the way that we empower people, I think is the wrong choice. We'll see how it plays out with this administration, and I'm hopeful that, you know, some adjustments are made along the way.
Chairman Smith, can you speak more to what we might see around the Child Victims Act, please?
Sure. So you saw the fiscal briefing with what the claims could cost. You know, it's interesting. There's some, confusion over what some of the language means for like transaction or occurrence language. That's from the Tort Claims Act. That's been around since 1995. The courts have wrestled with and interpreted that part of the statute and know how to do that. That language is directly from that part of the statute. So I'm confused about the confusion on that aspect. But I've heard of a piece of legislation that may come forward that would shorten the window for filing, meaning that the look back is still from time immemorial, but the time you have to file would be extended only to another 2 or 3 years. And so now that everyone's on notice that you can go back as far as you can go back, you only have 2 years to file. So I think that's going to curtail some of the the fiscal impact potentially.
Couldn't that actually make the fiscal impact worse by crunching all of the claims together into one time frame, and then the state will have to deal with all of them at once in one?
Yeah, I mean, the litigation is going to take years. And so the filing of the claim, put your place in line, but the litigation is going to be, this is going to be litigated over the next decade. I mean, this is going to be a long, long-term impact for the state to consider.
Mr. President, when it comes to the budget, and just looking at where some of the money is allocated right now, yesterday Congressman Nfume was talking about the red line, and I know you've talked about the future of the red line given the current climate at the federal level and the fact that funding for it is probably not going to happen. Congressman Nfume said that given that, it's probably time for everyone in the state to move on and look at the next step beyond the red line. Yet in Governor Moore's budget, there's $59 million allocated for a red line study. Do you think that's an appropriate use of money given where we are with the deficit?
I would say not all hope is lost, but it is a much harder road ahead. Until we know for sure, I think we should attempt to make sure that we are trying to invest in that corridor. What I know that we do know, where there is certainty, is that the east-west transit corridor in the Baltimore region is failing. We know that it is one of the single biggest gaps towards economic productivity is that we don't have a strong public transportation system to go east-west in the Baltimore region. We have a disconnected public transportation system, unlike others in DC that is a full network. We have a lot of north-south. We don't have any east-west. And so in the case that a red line's not able to move forward, we still have to deal with this problem. And so I'm hopeful that the administration and Department of Transportation will use some of the funds that are allocated currently to look at alternative solutions in the case that the red line cannot move forward to really address that east-west corridor.
So just so I'm clear, the money that the governor has dedicated in his budget proposal, and I know it's just a proposal at this point, for the red line study, you would be on board with using that money to look at other east-west transit options?
I'm always open to looking at any type of option that can improve that east-west corridor that we know is a bottleneck for economic productivity in the Baltimore region.
And then just quickly, if I could follow up on what we heard yesterday from some of the Republican members in the Senate and in the House, arguing that while we're hearing that there are tax cuts for, 2/3 of Marylanders, they say that given the other tax and targeted fee increases that are on the table, those people will not actually see any sort of tax cut benefits and they won't save any money. Is this just a game of shuffling money around where they're saving money on taxes but paying more over here?
Look, I think we are dealing with a measured approach where we're trying to be tailored in the revenues raised as well as the cuts that we're making. And so just as there's not an across-the-board 10% cut in state government, it's a much more nuanced agency-by-agency approach. I think it's a very similar approach right now in the governor's budget. We're going to have these ongoing conversations with the members of the General Assembly about whether or not there are adjustments we can make to flatten it in certain areas or to be more efficient. But I think the governor's approach was tailored and personalized as to where are the needs. For instance, on the delivery fee, we know we need transportation funds, and on operations, trying to take a targeted, balanced, progressive approach to the tax code.
Chair Vital, could you speak a little bit about the Prescription Drug Affordability Board and maybe some of the hurdles that the state faces in expanding their authority and how we can overcome them?
Thank you for the question. So there will be a bill to expand their authority. Senator Gall has that bill. We have not had the hearing yet. The cost of prescriptions is obviously very important to the members of the Senate, and so I'm not sure that we're going to expand it at this point. I think we're a little disappointed in the time that it's taken for the Prescription Drug Affordability Board to make recommendations, but during the prior administration they weren't funded, and so it has taken a little longer than we like. I personally have a bill on the cost of workman's comp prescriptions. To try to do a fee schedule, because now it's like the wild, wild west for prescriptions with workman's comp, unlike Medicare and other insurance companies. So I think overall, our constituents are very concerned about the cost of prescription drugs, and we need to do whatever we can to help to reduce that.
Is there a target time for there to be some action on drugs by the board? Have you heard anything?
Well, they're recommending I think it's 1 or 2 drugs, I can't remember, that they may, have an upper payment limit. We don't know what that effect will be. Originally, it was like 6 drugs, and the concern is, of course, that it could decrease the availability of the drug, because, if a drug company can sell it for more in another state, are they gonna make it available in our state? So, it's kind of a complicated issue, but they are working, I think they're working really hard. It's just a lot of implications.
Mr.
Thank you.
President, is the bill allowing beer and wine sales in grocery stores dead? If so, when was it declared dead and by whom?
I mean, look, I don't even think we have a bill in the Senate. I think there's a bill in the House. I don't think we have a Senate bill about it. So I would say if we don't have a bill, it's pretty dead. But I think the issue's gotten a lot of exposure. We've also got a lot of other big issues. And, we talked about 20 here today. Each one is significant impact for Marylanders. That's probably where we're going to be spending our time.
In the case of federal workers returning to the office, is that going to trickle down and affect state workers at all?
Say that one more time. Sorry,
And the executive order ending remote work for federal workers, is that going to affect state workers?
I don't believe so. Not that I've not heard anything from the executive agencies about shifting their policies in response. I think it's a balance that sort of blanket statements about remote work going away. I think are potentially very harmful, particularly for something with federal government where people are across the country and now all of a sudden will be expected to be back in DC or lose their jobs. There is a concern that we will lose a lot of talent. I don't see on the state level. I think we have a much more nuanced approach, agency by agency, depending on function and role and skill and ability about how those policies are applied.
How about with regard to the DEI pieces that are happening in the nation's capital?
I don't foresee us making any changes on that front. As I said before, I think we know that diversity is a strength here in Maryland. We are very fortunate to have robust caucuses here in the General Assembly that is reflective of the people of Maryland. We want to make sure that as we think about public service and the provision of public goods, that we're doing in a way that is equitable and thoughtful, that it is helping all people to be able to maximize their potential. And being thoughtful about that approach means focusing on those who need it most.
Mr. President, go back to the red line for a moment. What's the benefit of holding out hope, maintaining funding in the budget for that instead of just reading the tea leaves and pivoting?
It's a massive project, and I think until we know for sure, it makes sense to continue keeping the possibility alive. I think it's going to be very hard. We saw in the last Trump administration that not a single project that was in that category moved forward during the 4 years of the Trump administration. And so, I think I and a number of other legislators are very realistic about this. But until we know for sure, this isn't something you just flip the light switch on or off. It has big implications to call it off entirely. And so I think it makes sense to be very purposeful. Until we know for sure, we keep the possibility out there.
Could that delay the possibility of other projects and giving this community some real solutions in the short term?
I don't think so. I don't think this is going to be something that drags out. I think that we'll know in the next 30 to 60 days.
How confident are you in that, or how long is the state willing to wait to get federal funding when we already saw no funding come from the last 4 years of the Trump administration, and we're still gonna just hope that it happens?
I wouldn't say it's hope. We look for information. We wait to see where the early indications are with there's going to be a brand new Secretary of Transportation for the U.S. Stranger things have happened. People thought that the Key Bridge wasn't going to get fully funded. In fact, I was very concerned that it wasn't. Lo and behold, at the very end, full funding. It's going to be moving forward. I think we're going to see design soon. This is the legislative process has an interesting way of prioritizing different subjects. And so you never fully know until it's done. And so I think we'll see in the next 30 to 60 days how this new Transportation Department approaches the work.
Mr. President,
real quick, legislative leaders in both chambers are working up a big sort of energy policy bill. When do you think we'll see it, and kind of broadly speaking, what do you hope to accomplish with it?
Yeah, next week we'll hopefully be introducing the bill, a leadership package that includes the Speaker and I, as well as the chairs of the 2 relevant committees. I'll leave a lot of the details for next week, but ultimately it is to increase domestic generation of energy in Maryland through an all of the above approach, as well as make it easier for projects to site and exist in Maryland in a thoughtful way, while also encouraging renewables.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dave, sorry, we gotta go, David. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay. Thank you all. Have a great day and weekend.
I'm gonna remember.